So we've talked a bit about what a single parent will do, but who is that parent? Firstly, who is that parent? And which of the parents should do the care? Whether it should be nobody, male, female, or both. Which sex should do the care? This is a question which has received loads of attention in the literature. Because you've got two possible parents, and there's a massive amount of variation in nature about who does the care. Firstly, can we talk about general patterns? Well, yes, we can. Back to this Trivers 1972 enormously influential paper. We tend to find in nature that the females care more than the males. That's a general pattern which you identify if you look around in nature. Why should that be? Well, Trivers argued 2 points. He suggested, one, females are always sure that offspring belong to them. Like, you always know that you've given birth to a baby, basically, unless something very drastic has happened. But a male doesn't always know that offspring are theirs. They could have been cuckolded. And then, secondly, owing to this anisogamy, the Bateman principle that we went through at the beginning of the last lecture and the mating systems lecture and Domino introduced, owing to this Bateman principle, males tend to benefit from more matings. Not always, as subsequent research has shown, as we talked about with those Mormon crickets, etc. But owing to anisogamy, females usually gain less by deserting to remate than males do. So that's Trivers' argument for why females usually care. The effect of uncertain paternity has been debated, and I'm not going to go into the literature very much on it, but there are some really good papers. A really excellent one is Queller, 1997. That's a very, very well-written paper, and it's one of those kind of see the matrix papers. Okay. John Maynard Smith came along in the 70s with a game theory model, another wonderful game theory model for you all to consider, about which parent should care. And he supposed, let's make the supposition that females can choose either to care or desert. And if the female cares, she gets, we'll call the number of offspring she gets P1. And the number of offspring she gets if she deserts, P0. So hang on. If the offspring probability of survival, if the female cares, is P1, and the offspring hatching success, if she deserts, is P0. The number of offspring hatching with one parent and the number of offspring hatching with two parents. But at the same time, if she cares, she can lay a smaller clutch. That stands to reason. She's expending effort on caring, she can only lay fewer, so that's little w. And if she deserts her offspring, she can lay more eggs, big W. Right? So, reasonably simple so far. At the same point, the male can decide to care, in which case the female gets little w P2, because now there are two parents caring, and the male gets the same thing. And then, if the female decides to desert, both parents get big W, the female's clutch if she deserts, and P1, because the male is now caring. Or the male can decide to desert, in which case the female who's caring gets little w P1 because the male has deserted, and the male gets the same thing. And if the female decides to desert as well, if both of them decide to desert, the female gets big W P0, and the male gets big W P0. Okay, so that's the basic stage. But Maynard Smith realised that if the male deserts, he can go and remate again. He gets a benefit from remating. So he added a little kind of fudge factor there for what the male would get if he remated. And so you have 4 strategies, both caring, one or other of them caring, and then both deserting. And you can model mathematically what needs to happen, which quantities need to be bigger than which other quantities in order to select for care or deserting. So, for example, if the female is going to choose to desert, then this value here needs to be bigger than that value, otherwise there's no selection for her to desert. Similarly, if the male is going to desert, then this value here needs to be bigger than that value, otherwise there's no selection for him to desert. Does that make sense? Yeah, good. So that kind of model kind of stood for a few decades until somebody realised that this little fudge factor here, 1 plus p, violates. Do you remember the Fisherian constraint that every individual has exactly 2 parents, one mother and one father? So male and female reproduction must be exactly equal. These guys here, these 2 papers, and I really highly recommend reading these papers because they make sense of this if you didn't find that I made sense there. These will make sense of all of this. And they're extremely well written. The Queller is brilliant. The Coco and Janians is also brilliant. It takes 2 to tango. They point out that this here is effectively extra offspring for males on top of what the females are getting. And so that violates the principle that male and female reproduction should be exactly equal. And so what really, those males that are deserting to remate are effectively stealing offspring from the males, from other males. They must be stealing offspring from other males. And so these males, there should really be a 1 minus p up here to counteract this 1 plus p. It's a really quite interesting story. So much for all the kind of dry game theory. What do we see happening in the real world? Okay, well, if we look at mammals, as we said before, mammals are part of what springs to mind when you think about parental care generally. Mammals have almost all female care. So, pretty much because females do the gestation, females do the lactation, and so males can't really help at that point. And so males are heavily selected to go off to seek other mates during the period of gestation and lactation, when male help doesn't really help. And correspondingly, you see that mammals are mostly polygynous. There are a couple of exceptions where, like these pygmy marmosets, where males do the care. Males do most of the care, and they are typically monogamous. Birds, by contrast, are almost all biparental. So it takes, and the reason is because, the reason tends to be because it takes 2 parents to raise any offspring at all. The feeding rate that the offspring require basically puts both parents on lockdown. So you've got to have 2 parents, one to incubate and defend, and the other to be feeding. Correspondingly, birds are, at least socially, largely monogamous. But then there are exceptions again, so things like chickens and pheasants, they will have monogamous, so they'll have polygynous mating systems with females doing the majority of the care. But notice that all of these are anisogamous. They're all anisogamous with internal fertilisation, like they conform to the general pattern that you would predict the females to do all the care. So look at the effect of ecology. The different ecologies of birds and mammals have basically dictated their patterns of parental care on top of that predicted effective anisogamy. So ecology has a huge role to play, and it becomes even more obvious when you look at other taxa. So fish, there's no general pattern in fish. Mostly they have no care, but the most common pattern is for the male to care. And then there are a few biparental carers and very few female carers. And what tends to happen is that you get male care where the fertilisation is external. So sometimes, so in external fertilisers, the female will spawn her eggs onto the ground, onto the substrate, and the male will then waft his sperm over them. In those cases, you get males caring, whereas if you have internal fertilisation, like the majority of terrestrial vertebrates, you get female care. You get female or biparental care. Very interesting. And there are lots of hypotheses about it. Trivers thought it was to do with paternity certainty, that if you're an internal fertiliser, you're less likely to know that your offspring are yours. You're more likely to be cuckolded. So those males in species with internal fertilisation gain less from caring because they're less sure that the offspring are theirs. Dawkins and Carlyle came along and said, no, that doesn't really work because of complicated reasons, but they argued that it ought to be because of the order of gamete release. So if females spawn their eggs onto the substrate, they are able to bugger off more quickly than the male. So effectively, it's literally the moment of whoever's able to abandon their eggs most quickly is the one that gets to abandon, and the one that's remaining is left in what they call a cruel bind, holding the babies, literally, and has to have to do the care. George Williams, whom we met before, suggested that it's more to do with who's associated with the embryos. If a male is territorial and the eggs are laid on his territory, then he's more likely to be in association with the embryos and more likely to care. Carnatal suggested that it's more to do with paternity protection. So males in external fertilising species are selected to stick around at the site of fertilisation in case anyone comes along and tries to sneakily fertilise some of those eggs. So there are loads of hypotheses about why that should be. In amphibians, you get mostly no care. We know that it's not to do, where there is care, it's typically female. Female and male care are basically similarly distributed, and biparental is rare. It's not to do with mode of fertilisation, at least. We know that from that Beck paper. In invertebrates, such as insects, there's loads of care. Most insects do no care, but there is loads of examples of care. Many more female carers than others. You get female. You're typically predicted to get more female because of internal fertilisation, similarly to the fish argument. And the best argument so far is that males tend to care where their mating costs are minimised. So if they can guard many eggs from multiple females, and that allows them to gain lots of matings while still doing the care. So there are lots of different kind of taxon-specific, ecology-specific arguments for who does the care.